Today we explore 19th century Tiflis, the Baku oil fields, the rugged Caucasus Mountains, and the lost collection of Dmitry Ermakov.
Welcome to the PicMash YouTube channel.
Welcome to the PicMash YouTube channel.
So if you were to just imagine stepping out of a time machine.
Right.
And you find a medieval watermill grinding grain, but it's sitting directly in the shadow of a smoke-belching factory.
Yeah, or, you're standing in the middle of a street where these ancient camel caravans are literally being overtaken by iron rails.
Exactly. And that is what we are doing today. We are taking a deep dive into the visual archive of Dmitry Ermakov.
He was this 19th century photographer who, he essentially operated as a visual anthropologist for the region.
He really did. But his collection is not just some nostalgic look at the Caucasus, it's the documentation of a profoundly disorienting collision.
A collision of eras, really.
Yeah, it's a record of a region experiencing just a hyper-accelerated identity crisis. Because to understand what you're looking at in these archives, you have to realize that the Caucasus in the late 19th century was basically the ultimate geopolitical chessboard.
Right. The Russian Empire was pushing aggressively into the region.
Very aggressively. They were hungry for resources and, they needed a strategic buffer zone. And they brought with them the absolute cutting edge of the Industrial Revolution.
But they were bringing it into a landscape where the geography had dictated this deeply traditional way of life for, thousands of years.
Exactly. And the focal point of that collision, the real administrative heart of it all, was Tiflis.
Which is modern-day Tbilisi.
Right. And when you examine the wide panoramic shots of the city from this era, the topography is honestly the first thing that strikes you. Tiflis was not built on some convenient flat plain.
No, not at all. It's entirely defined by the rushing currents of the Kura River.
Yeah, it acts as the central artery. It cuts this incredibly deep gorge right through the rock. So the architecture, it really had to negotiate with gravity.
You see that so clearly in the Avlabari suburb. Ermakov photographed these multi-story houses with intricate, these wooden balconies that just cling precariously to the sheer cliff faces.
They do.
They honestly look as though a strong gust of wind could just send them tumbling directly into the water.
Because for centuries, the landscape completely commanded the engineering. You see that deep history anchored by the ruins of the Narikala Fortress, too.
Oh, yeah, looming over everything.
Right, it's dominated the skyline for over a millennium. And higher still, you have the Church of St. David sitting isolated on the mountaintop.
These structures were defensive, they were spiritual, and they were entirely deferential to the mountains themselves.
Yes. But then, the Russian Imperial administration steps in and begins laying down the infrastructure of a modern economy.
And it is so jarring, because suddenly, right next to those traditional riverside dwellings, there is just a stark brick factory smokestack piercing the skyline.
It completely changes the visual language of the city.
It honestly looks like a double exposure photograph,
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like, it's as if a medieval painting and a cold, rigid industrial blueprint were just accidentally printed onto the exact same canvas.
Yeah, because you have these ancient floating water mills anchored directly in the fast-moving currents of the Kura River.
Right.
And then cutting right across that exact same river, you have a heavy geometric metal truss bridge.
The Avlabari Bridge.
Exactly. So you have pedestrians in traditional flowing garments walking across this iron structure that honestly belongs in Manchester, St. Petersburg.
The contrast there between the floating water mills and the metal truss bridge, it perfectly illustrates the ideological shift that was taking place.
It really does. Because those floating mills, they were an ingenious piece of localized engineering.
They utilized the river's kinetic energy without even needing permanent flood-prone foundations on the banks.
Right. They worked with the volatile nature of the Kura. But the Avlabari Bridge, being constructed of iron and steel, represents a completely different philosophy.
It's the language of imperial dominance.
Absolutely. It's about imposing a permanent, rigid grid over an unpredictable environment. Steel requires a vast industrialized supply chain.
Whereas the water mills just relied on local timber and, generational knowledge.
Exactly.
But I do have to ask, look at what that steel infrastructure actually accomplished on a human level. I mean, did these new bridges truly integrate the disparate worlds of Tiflis, or did they just make the growing wealth gap painfully obvious?
That is the big question.
Because the archives prove this was not a unified city. On one hand, you have these grand, newly constructed European-style theaters with imposing neoclassical facades.
Right, catering entirely to the Russian administrators and the new industrial elite.
Exactly. But then, just a stone's throw away, Ermakov documents the dense hillside dwellings of the people they called the troglodytes.
Yeah, that contrast is wild.
We are talking about entire communities living in homes literally carved straight into the earth and rock. It doesn't feel like a society moving forward together, you know?
No, it doesn't.
It feels like two completely different centuries awkwardly sharing the same ZIP code.
Well, the reality is that the infrastructure was designed to facilitate resource extraction and military movement. It was never about social cohesion.
Right.
The wealth generated by those new factories largely bypassed the local craftsmen and the troglodyte communities. So Tiflis became a city of incredibly stark stratification.
It really did.
But to truly comprehend the sheer force of this industrial wave, you really have to step outside the city limits.
You have to go into the mountains.
You do. You have to trace the arteries of commerce into the rugged geography of the Caucasus Mountains. Because the terrain out there, it functioned as a natural fortress against time.
The scale of the landscape in those mountain passes is just overwhelming. Like when you look at the routes like the Georgian Military Road or the Military Sukhumi Road, human beings look like absolute specks against the rock.
They really do. The geography is so imposing.
There is this one image from the archive that captures this defiance of human survival perfectly. It's near the fortified village of Kasat.
Oh, the tombs.
Yes. Built directly into a vertical rock face, hundreds of feet in the air, are these ancient tombs. And the only access point is this spindly, terrifyingly fragile wooden ladder just propped against the sheer drop.
And that sheer verticality of the Kasada tombs tells you everything you need to know about the isolation of these communities.
Yeah.
When your geography is that extreme, outside influence is almost entirely neutralized. The mountains insulated these societies from imperial taxation, from conscription, and cultural assimilation.
And because of that buffer, Ermakov was able to document a profound diversity of peoples who remain, fiercely independent.
Right, like his photographs of the Karaches.
Yes, in the Tipperdal during a holiday celebration. They are set against this imposing wall of stone huts and sharp peaks, and they're all wearing traditional chokas.
And the chokas are fascinating from a historical perspective.
They're these elegant, long-flowing gowns, but across the chest, they feature those highly ornamental rows of cartridge pouches.
Exactly. The perfect example of practical military wear evolving into deep cultural symbolism.
And the portraiture itself is incredibly striking. There is an image of a Tatar shepherd, simply labeled Choban, just standing proudly with his flock.
Ah, yes.
He has a dagger tucked into his belt, he's leaning on a long wooden staff, and he is wearing the densest, most enormous fur papaka hat.
Which, by the way, the papaka is a brilliant piece of microclimate technology.
Really?
Yeah, the dense sheep or goat wool regulates body temperature in the freezing, unpredictable winds of the high passes. And it also repels rain and snow.
So it's not just fashion.
No, not at all. It creates an imposing silhouette, sure.
Yeah.
But its primary function is survival in a high-altitude ecosystem.
That makes total sense.
And you see that same hyper-localized adaptation in their logistics, too. The archives show Ossetian carts heavily loaded with animal skins that are stretched tight and filled with wine.
Just navigating these incredibly narrow, unpaved cliff edges.
Right. And over in Erevan, you see Karapapak camel drivers leading caravans along dry riverbanks. These modes of transport persisted for one simple reason. A steel locomotive or a modern wagon simply could not traverse that terrain.
Right, they would just break down or fall off a cliff.
Exactly.
But I look at communities like the Karaches, and I have to ask, did they even care about the smokestacks down in Tiflis? Like, did the Industrial Revolution feel like an invasion to them, or was it just some distant abstract rumor down in the valleys that had zero bearing on their daily survival?
That's a great question. Initially, it was likely just noise, just a distant rumor. But the valleys were the arteries of trade, and the Russian Empire was systematically expanding the road networks to secure military dominance over those very mountains.
So they couldn't ignore it forever.
No. The invasion wasn't an immediate military occupation at every peak. It was the slow, inevitable creep of the market.
The market always finds a way.
Always. And as we trace those trade routes back down toward the urban centers, we find that tradition didn't just stay hidden in the high altitudes. It bled right down into the streets of the modernizing cities.
Yeah, the transition wasn't a clean break at all, was it?
Not even a little bit.
It was a messy, overlapping friction. There is a photograph taken near the Bellevue Garden in Tiflis that captures this perfectly.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Running on metal rails right down the middle of the street is a newly introduced horse-drawn tram, the Konka. And operating just yards away from it is a deeply traditional Georgian arba.
The arba being the heavy, two-wheeled wooden cart.
Right.
Those massive wheels were specifically designed to navigate the deep, muddy ruts of unpaved mountain roads.
Yeah, and you see these two distinct eras of transportation sharing the exact same street corner. It's surreal.
It is.
But it gets even more vivid. Ermakov documented pilgrims departing for a sacred feast in Mitsketa on the 1st of October.
Oh, this photo is amazing.
They are traveling in these ornate arbas, which are draped in beautiful, intricate woven rugs, and they are being slowly pulled by water buffaloes.
Right down the street. That image encapsulates the cognitive dissonance of the period so perfectly.
It really does.
Because for the people living through this, the industrial age wasn't a light switch that just flipped overnight. A resident of Tiflis might take a modern tram running on steel rails to his job at a newly built brick factory.
But when it came time to fulfill a sacred religious duty, he harnessed a water buffalo to a wooden cart.
Exactly. The new infrastructure didn't immediately overwrite the old cultural operating system.
Sometimes that friction is so stark it just stops you in your tracks. There is a photograph of an elderly woman being transported, and there is no tram, no horse, not even a water buffalo.
Right.
She is sitting in a rough-hewn wooden cart that is being physically pulled by a man in the front and pushed by a man from behind. It is pure human labor.
Yeah, it's a very striking image of rural poverty mixed with tradition.
And meanwhile, if you look at the rural commerce in the markets of Elisavetpol, the ground is just blanketed with givri.
The clay vessels.
Yeah, these giant egg-shaped clay wine vessels. Some of them are taller than a person, and they are being strapped onto primitive wooden carts to be hauled away.
And, you know, the persistence of the gevri is a prime example of a technology that is so perfectly optimized for its purpose that industrialization just couldn't offer a better alternative.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the Georgians have been making wine for thousands of years. These clay vessels are buried underground, utilizing the Earth's thermal mass to ferment and store the wine at a naturally stable temperature.
Wow, so the Earth itself is the refrigerator.
Exactly. A modern factory couldn't improve upon that chemical process. It was already perfect.
That's incredible.
And you see a similar localized brilliance in the agricultural architecture, too. In the Baytum region, Ermakov photographed the barns of Osman Bekir Ogli.
Those are the ones raised up on stilts, right?
Yes. These heavy wooden structures raised high off the ground on thick stilts.
They look almost like they belong over water, like marsh houses or something.
The principle is very similar. In a high humidity environment, raising the harvest off the damp earth prevents rot and protects the grain from pests.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is a highly specific architectural solution to a highly specific environmental problem. But, you know, while the rural markets and the high mountains held on to these localized solutions.
The forces of modernization were just accelerating everywhere else.
Uncontrollably. And to see the absolute zenith of this industrial consumption, Ermakov takes us to the extreme opposite end of the spectrum.
Right. He takes us to the oil fields of Baku.
Yes, he does.
And if Tiflis was this awkward, overlapping transition, Baku was just the total eclipse of the past. It was the fully mechanical, aggressively chaotic future.
The context for Baku is essential here, though. In the late 19th century, the world was transitioning away from whale oil and desperately needed kerosene for elimination.
You're right, the lights had to stay on.
Exactly. And the surface-level oil deposits around the Caspian Sea made Baku the epicenter of a massive global gold rush, or black gold rush.
Right.
European industrialists, including the Nobel brothers and the Rothschilds, just poured immense capital into the region.
And the physical result of all that capital is genuinely disorienting. When you look at the imagery from the Bibi-Eibat and Manteshef oil fields, it is a stark, almost alien contrast to the lush botanical gardens of Tiflis, or, you know, the crisp air of the Tebrada all.
It looks like a different planet.
It does. The landscape is entirely devoured by hundreds of towering, pyramid-shaped wooden oil derricks. They look like a dense, blackened forest stretching all the way to the horizon.
Yeah.
And carved directly into the hillsides are these immense drum-like metal storage reservoirs.
Which, by the way, the pyramid shape of the derricks was an engineering necessity. It was designed to provide the structural stability needed for the heavy drilling mechanisms.
To keep them from falling over.
Exactly. Especially while withstanding the fierce winds of the Absheron Peninsula. But the problem was, the efficiency of the drilling drastically outpaced the infrastructure needed to contain what they actually found.
Right, because this wasn't a neat, controlled corporate operation.
Not at all.
Ermakov's camera captures literal lakes of thick, black oil just pooling on the raw, scarred earth. The work sites are a chaotic mess of debris, broken timber, and tangled metal pipes.
The technology of the Gusher era was just incredibly blunt. When a high-pressure well was struck, they often lacked the valving technology to cap it.
So it just exploded everywhere.
Yes. The oil would just erupt into the air, and laborers would have to frantically build earthen dams to catch the crude before it flowed away.
Wow.
It was resource extraction operating at a frantic, almost panic-inducing velocity, and the human toll was severe.
You can see that toll in the photos. In a connected region, Ermakov photographed the labor force at Morgan's Rocky Mine in Batum.
Yeah, that image is haunting.
The exhaustion in that photograph is palpable. You see this group of weary workers resting in the dirt, surrounded by wheelbarrows, picks, and just simple hand tools.
No.
The immense wealth of this new global era was ultimately being dragged out of the ground by sheer, grinding human effort.
It was.
And when I look at the chaos in Baku, I really have to push back on the very definition of progress.
How so?
Just put yourself in the shoes of someone from that era. Imagine the sheer sensory shock that a camel driver from Yerevan or that Tatar shepherd in his dense fur hat would experience if they crested a ridge and looked down into the Bibi-Eibat fields for the very first time.
Oh, it would be terrifying.
The deafening mechanical roar of the steam engines, the choking smell of crude oil and sulfur, to them it wouldn't look like human advancement. It would look like an alien invasion violently tearing up the earth.
I mean, it is entirely understandable why it would be perceived that way. Because it wasn't moral progress. It was an unstoppable economic engine that permanently reshaped the geopolitical and environmental reality of the globe.
It really did.
The deep roots of the ancient world simply could not compete with the sheer velocity of industrialized capital. And that is exactly why the lost collection of Dmitry Ermakov is such a vital historical asset.
Because he managed to freeze a profoundly fragile moment in time.
Exactly. He captured the exact millisecond of impact. He documented a region caught painfully yet perfectly halfway between the ancient stone walls of the Narikala Fortress and the oil-soaked mechanical destiny of Baku. The water buffalo and the steam engine shared the road for only a brief window before the modern era fully consumed the landscape.
It really makes you evaluate the world we are moving through right now. I mean, Ermakov spent his life documenting the physical collision of the 19th and 20th centuries. But when future historians look back at our present day through our digital archives, what colliding eras are we currently living through without even realizing it?
That's a great thought.
What is our everyday equivalent of a slow-moving water buffalo parked right next to a towering factory smokestack? It's something to think about.
Right.
Thank you for watching PicMash. Please subscribe for more historical archives.
Thank you for watching PicMash. Please subscribe for more historical archives.